First speakers for today will be Schullery and Marsha Karle. They have collaborated as author and illustrator and husband and wife on 5 books to date. Their newest, published this summer, is The High Wild Country, a celebration of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. It offers us a richly textured portrait of this magnificent region and world treasure with engaging text in more than 80 of Marsha's watercolors and pencil drawings. Marsha worked for the National Park Service for many years, retiring 6 years ago to pursue her artwork full-time. She's active in the Montana Institute for the Arts and has held numerous shows in regional galleries. Paul is a historian and naturalist and author, co-author, and editor of 40 books about nature, conservation, and outdoor sport. He is the recipient of an honorary doctorate from Montana State University and the Wallace Stegner Award from the University of Colorado Center of the American West. Paul was an advisor for the Ken Burns film, The National Parks, America's Best Idea. He too worked for the National Park Service for years and since retiring has been scholar in residence at the Montana State University Library. Please welcome Paul Schullery and Marsha Karle.
Thank you. Technology. It's great for us to have a chance to be here and share some stories about these wonderful parks, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be invited here. This is a wonderful festival and a great thing for Montana. And what I'd like to do is start by explaining a little bit about how we got to do this book and how we got into the habit of doing books generally. Marsha and I started doing books together after a trip to Alaska in 1998. We spent most of the summer there, but I decided to use a week that we spent at Katmai National Park, Brooks Camp, as a framework for a book about Alaska and wildness in Alaska. When the publisher asked how I would like to have the book illustrated, I said, well, you know, you can't hesitate to do this, but my wife's getting to be a pretty good artist, you know, maybe I should see if she would be interested. And they said, well, you know, nothing to lose, have her send some pictures along. And Marsha was really shy about this. She'd never published anything before. And she sent off a few sample drawings and held her breath. And I should warn you that the PowerPoint kind of washes out the pencil drawings. I think the paintings come through okay, but the pencil drawings get a little washed out. Trust me, the actual drawings don't work quite like that. And what was fun about it was when the publisher responded, they didn't even bother to say anything about whether or not her drawings were okay. They just went right into, well, we'll need about this many for this many chapters. And it was a wonderful affirmative moment for her. So Marsha ended up doing some lovely pencil drawings for the book, and ever since then I've been pestering her to illustrate something I've written. It was also the first time she'd ever tried to draw a person, me, which or didn't help. I've never been quite sure. This was actually her second attempt at drawing me. The first time, my butt was down around my knees. That just wasn't acceptable. You know, you think if you have your own illustrator, that you really get the breaks and you always look good, and they shave a few pounds off here and there, give you back your hair. But Marsha's always pretty much stuck to what she sees. I didn't think my nose was that big. Anyway, the book came out fine. and it encouraged us to keep working on things like that. And over the past 10 years or so, I've done a series of books about fly fishing, and especially about trout behavior, fishing history, including this one, which require all sorts of illustrations. And once again, I pestered Marsha, and she produced a great variety of pictures for this book. But as with the others we've done, I always felt like each book should have a subtitle of Too Many Words by Paul Schullery and Not Enough Pictures by Marsha Karle. Until the present book. The book that we've just finished, this Waterton Glacier book, was our chance to correct for that. Clark Whitehorn, our editor at the University of New Mexico Press, who some of you may know because he was the publisher at Montana Historical Society for years, was as eager as I was to showcase Marsha's art. I really don't think of Marsha as the illustrator of this book. We worked so closely on it and spent so much time together in the park that what we really ended up with was a book of two perspectives that complement each other about all of our experiences and the places that we saw in the park. It's a story that meant so much to us that it feels like a true collaboration rather than her providing illustrations for my story. So I'll let Marsha tell you sort of an artist's eye look at how she put together her part of that story.
Well, in my defense, my pictures of people have vastly improved over the past few years. I've had lots more practice, and I think they're coming along. Anyway, so no more butt down by the knees. I started working for the National Park Service in Alaska in 1981, and from then on, I was just in love with wilderness and nature. But it wasn't until I met Paul in Yellowstone, when we were both working there, and we started dating. And one of the things that Paul liked to do in the evenings was to climb up on a hill and scan the countryside for grizzly bears. And, you know, I was happy and dutiful, and I hiked up to the top of the hill with him. But about 10 minutes of no bears, and I was like, okay, we'll go now. You know, and he was, of course, not ready to go. So I started taking pencil and paper with me and started doing some drawings and sketching. And that developed into, well, I guess I need to add some color to these pictures. And so I started doing that. And it grew and grew over the years while we were still in Yellowstone. And when I retired 6 or almost 7 years ago now, I announced I'm going to be an artist. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 6.5 years. And I'm having a great time doing it. But part of the reason it's so much fun is that Paul and I get to work together on projects like the Glacier book. And when we started talking about this Waterton Glacier book, I knew that I wanted it to be very different from the Alaska book. I knew I wanted it to be rich with illustrations and color. I always look back at that Alaska book and I think, gosh, I wish I'd done 20 more drawings. And at the time, of course, I was working full-time and didn't really have time to do that. But this time, I did have time. So I worked from photographs. This is one of the paintings I did from a photograph. And then the third image here is how it looks in the book. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be showing you as I talk through this. I decided that I would do 3 types of images: full watercolor paintings, what I call watercolor sketches or vignettes, and pencil drawings. And I started out painting really whatever I felt like painting. When we signed the contract for the book, it required 65 paintings. And I thought, oh, okay, I could do that. And it seemed like a lot at the time, but we ended up with 87. So you can see we kind of overshot it. Here's one of my examples of people that I think I accomplished a lot better than the one a few years earlier. Through the process, we made lists of what we needed to do and what we needed to fill in for the book. And there were actually a few times when I would do a painting because I felt like doing it, and there wasn't really a place for it in the book, so Paul would write a few paragraphs and find a way to insert it in the book, which was really nice. That was part of the collaboration part. Also, one of the things that we were dealing with is working from photographs, because I don't necessarily work in plein air, which is out in the field. I might do small sketches or put some colors down to think about what I want to do, but mostly I work in the studio on photographs. Some of our photographs weren't really very great, so I had to use my imagination for colors, and this is what I came up with for Avalanche Lake. And this is how it was put in the book as a chapter heading. We thought the design was really beautiful of this book. The designer did just a great job. There's the author napping on the shore of a lake. And again, I really improved on my people drawings. I felt like this one turned out well. There was a lot of love that went into it. And
I didn't see my notes.
But in this one, the designer chose to put the author napping and the artist hard at work. I thought that was appropriate. One thing that as we were starting this book, I hadn't done a whole lot of were large landscapes. I always felt like landscapes, they're so big, how am I ever going to fit that on the paper? And I think I finally figured it out. And now I'm really enjoying doing landscapes as a part of what I normally paint. Most artists do work from photos in the studio. You can't spend all of your time in the field as much as we would all like to just be out there hiking and taking pictures and things. So most artists do work from photographs. And as I said, sometimes the photographs aren't that great. Sometimes the photographs are better than the paintings. Sometimes the paintings are better than the photographs. And some of these color shifts that you see are part of the PowerPoint projector being a little bit of a problem with that, but my interpretation of the colors is one thing, and then the way the colors end up in the book is yet another. So sometimes we were a little surprised when we would see the page layouts, and that's, the colors were somewhat different. And these images traveled much farther than I've ever traveled in my life. The original paintings, well, I'm going to show you some pictures of this in a minute, but the original paintings actually were shipped to the publisher in Santa Fe, or in Albuquerque, I'm sorry, and then they shipped them to China to be scanned, and it was very hard for me to see my original work of a year go off on some ship that might sink, or some plane that might crash, and that was the hardest part of the process, I think. This was one of my favorite landscapes that actually the editor chose for the cover of the book, and the designer chose to use in a number of different ways in the book, on this title page, on a chapter opening, and then also on the cover. And through the process, it was pretty intimidating. Oh, I've got to do 65 of these. I had a deadline, and so every once in a while we would stand them up on the bookshelves and kind of try to get a feel for where we were. And then they all had to be assigned to where they fit into the book, and then of course the designer would take them and fit them as appropriate. So that's the serious part of artwork is labeling and fitting them into the book. And then scanning everything we scanned before we sent it off, because I was just so fearful about putting all of this original work into a box. And we watched the packaging guy package it and send it off. It was a wonderful experience. Paul and I do so enjoy working together on projects like this, and we hope to do another one sometime. I haven't been able to commit to a book because this was like a year out of my life. We just working on this one book, and it didn't leave a lot of time for other things. But maybe one of these days we'll do another.
It was my fault we ended up with so many. Marsha, I think, would have been content with 65 is a lot of paintings to do in 1 year. But I kept saying, well, couldn't we just have a Westlow Petro Trout, just one more, and every time there was always one more. And the one that just wouldn't work was Moss Campion. It's a lovely high elevation flower that I sensed passive resistance here. Marsha tried 3 times on the Moss Campion and was never happy with it. So there never was one in the book. But all of that was an enormous amount of fun, She was always very patient when I would come in with, "Do we have one more picture of?" I was always coming up with something else. What follows are some brief passages from the book, along with some of Marsha's pictures that either directly illustrate what I'm saying with the words in the book, or at least kind of capture the spirit of the story that I'm telling. Grizzly Country invites you to participate in a rich and thriving folklore, a near mythology of nature that humans have constructed around the bear. Every bit of bear sign provides you with a link into that world, whether it scares the devil out of you, stirs your soul, or just gives you a laugh. One day at the Goat Haunt Trailhead in Waterton, I overheard some hikers excitedly reporting to a ranger on a pile of bear scat they'd found on the trail a few miles away. The ranger calmly answered their questions and agreed with their wide-eyed assertions that yes, sometimes the piles are really big. But finally had to explain that you can't tell everything about a bear just by seeing a pile of poop. They were a little let down by the failure of this pile to provide a complete biography of the bear that produced it. But after a moment's thought, one of them said, "It does, however, answer the age-old question." Many Glacier is always a great place to look for wildlife, but it was especially generous this day, though every building in the place was still locked up from the winter. At 6:35, I parked in the big empty parking lot in front of the Swift Current Lodge, slipped the spotting scope mount over the car window, and began to scan the slopes rising in all directions. Right away, I saw goats partway up Grinnell Point, the eminence to the south. 10 minutes later, mule deer came out onto the parking lot and watched me for a while before turning back into the trees. A minute later, scanning the steep cliffs of Alton Peak to the north, I saw another goat and then a cow elk appeared in the brush just above and behind the lodge. Scanning to the northwest, I found a herd of 11 bighorn sheep. Sorry, these are kind of washed out. Look at the book. There. I found a herd of 11 bighorn sheep settled in a high ravine well above the heavy cover. From their position, they had at least some shelter from the wind without having their view blocked in any direction. As I watched them, they started to move off in various directions, so I visually followed the ravine up and up the cliffs, where I picked out 2 more goats from the goat-sized patches of old snow. At 6:52, I saw what I was most looking for. A grizzly bear sow became partly visible, moving through the scrubby vegetation only a little ways up the slope behind the lodge. This picture, by the way, is called "No Cub Left Behind." Over the next few minutes, Her two cubs revealed themselves in disappointingly brief intervals, and then the whole family settled down in a little grove of mixed brush, aspen, and evergreens. Though I saw parts of them now and then over the next half hour, I never got as good a look again. I kept watching through the occasional snow shower, losing my view as curtains of snow and sleet swept across the higher slopes. Then, about 7:30, I drove half a mile or so back to another pullout that allowed me to scan the mountains southeast of Many Glacier. Here, I really appreciated a strong scope, which can bring large mammals 3 or 4 miles away up to a recognizable size. I soon picked out a big lumbering form in some high meadows on Wind Mountain. Another grizzly bear, this one probably a big male, judging from its proportions and general massiveness. I watched him wander around for about 15 minutes. He spent most of his time with his nose to the ground, grazing or digging or just maybe snuffling the possibilities. After many years of watching them, I am still surprised at the extended periods of inaction even a standing bear will endure for reasons I cannot discern. Then, fairly well exhilarated with my good fortune of seeing so much activity, I headed back to St. Mary for some coffee and a hot shower. Marsha should be up by now, and I couldn't wait to tell her about everything. That evening, we returned together, and to the morning's list of species, we added a young bull moose with his antlers in velvet, about halfway between Bath and St. Mary. I didn't have the parking lot at Logan Pass to myself on a darkly overcast late fall day with lowering clouds driven hard by a snow-cold west wind. As late in the season as it was, there were still dozens of cars in the parking lot with people hurrying to and from the shelter of the visitor center. A van load of young hikers pulled into the parking spot next to mine, and a tall, leggy young woman popped out and immediately responded to the dramatic chill by deciding to add a layer. As her companions rooted busily through their stuff for cameras and jackets, she quickly removed her boots and jeans, danced unaffectedly and pinkly around in the icy wind while she extracted a pair of tights from the pack and put them on, and then restored her jeans and boots. I didn't even ask Marsha to do that. As more people got in and out of their cars, I focused on the distance, scanning the fabulous peakscape of this most famous of Glacier Park passes. To the west, I picked a fast-flying eastbound eagle out of the confusion of grayish sky and snow-patched peaks. The bird's velocity was unbelievable. Outrunning the wind, it crossed over the divide above us and seemed to fast forward to the east, shrinking smaller and smaller until I lost it in the crosshatched snow patterns of Heavy Runner Mountain. It was a moment just between me and the eagle, yet shared with a few others who happened to look upright then, yet entirely missed by many others who didn't happen to be looking upright then, or who were still watching to see what that girl might do next. Those of us who saw the eagle's flight exchanged a few smiles, but we didn't say a word to each other, and what could we possibly say to the ones who missed it? It was not a moment for a camera or quantifying field notes. It was not something that would advance science or yield to analysis. It was not a shared thrill that required social celebration or the rhetorical applause of happy conversation. It was instead the connection we are, after all, out there seeking, when the door opens for an instant on some greater truth, the kind of wisdom that eludes us if we try to convert into words the thing that only real, the kind of wisdom that eludes us if we try to convert into words the thing whose only real value is as untranslated experience. Come to this high, wild country with your heart open for that, and everything else it has to offer will be yours as well. Thank you.
Thank thanks very much to Paul and Marsha for the preview of their newest book, This High Wild Country, and you will be out signing after this session, so thank you very much. Our next presenter, I'm pleased to introduce Donna Love is an award-winning author who lives in Sealy Lake where her husband is the district ranger. And one of the things I really appreciate about Donna is that she's written about some of my favorite birds, including loons. Her book, Loons, Diving Birds of the North, Awesome Ospreys, Fishing Birds of the World. The Osprey book was a Skipping Stones Honor Award winner for promoting ecological understanding and environmental cooperation around the world. She's also written Henry, the Impatient Heron, and Animals Count in Grand Canyon National Park. Her newest, which was supposed to be released already, you know, not everything happens when we want it to or expect it to, unfortunately won't be out for another couple of weeks approximately. Is November 15th when they're expecting it?
Still expecting it.
Okay, so that's the finger crossed date. So we have the privilege of this very exclusive sneak preview of her latest book called The Totally Out There Guide to Glacier National Park. Please welcome Donna Love. Yeah, well, Donna gets her computer set up here. I think it would be wonderful if anybody had a comment or would like to invite another. I would love to hear another story from Glacier Park. I don't know how much time it'll take for Donna to get rolling, but maybe one other animal sighting you can tell us about. Any moments? Or did someone have a question in the audience? Yes, we do.
I have a question, Marsha. Did you always work in watercolor right from the gate, or did you experiment with other mediums, or do you paint in other mediums and just chose watercolor for this project? Or to me, watercolor just seems so hard to work with.
That's what people say. I have always loved looking at watercolor paintings, you know, of other people's. And so when I started with watercolor and have remained with watercolor. I have not tried other mediums. And people say, oh, it's so hard, it's so hard. Well, yeah, I guess it is, but you know, you can make corrections in watercolor. People think you can't. You can. Paper have to have heavy paper in case you don't want to go through the paper if you're scrubbing something out. But I find watercolors to be freeing. They can be loose, they can be tight. You can do a lot with watercolors. You can get nice deep colors. You can get light, lighter kind of things. I don't know, I think it's fun. I like the challenge of watercolors.
Other questions?
Any Wolverine sightings?
No, we've never seen a wolverine in either park now. Those are hard to come by. That's one of those sort of holy grails among wildlife sightings.
Yeah, I only asked with the session yesterday about a Wolverine whale, which was written
Oh, yeah.
as a result of the study.
Right? Yeah.
What's the most exotic? What did you feel was the most exotic encounter?
Exotic.
Well, your numbers on that one day, just the different species that you had were extraordinary.
Yeah.
Is there any particular moment where it's like, wow?
No, but there's a well, maybe there is, it's not coming to mind. Context is everything, seeing something at a difficult time, a difficult place after going a long way.
Yes.
It always feels a little too easy or a little lazy to be in a parking lot and they watching this fabulous spectacle of wildlife. But the thing I've learned in both parks, if you're among the people who haven't traveled there much, but you're interested in the wildlife, when you go to a hotel restaurant in Yellowstone or Glacier in the morning, and you see the crowd of people sitting there eating breakfast, they look pretty much like they're all just one group of people, but there are two groups of people there. There are the people who are having breakfast, getting ready to start their day, and there are the people who started their day long ago and have just come back from breakfast. And that second group is the one that has seen all the wildlife. There's no comparison for being out there really early. And I know that seems intuitive to those of us who go there a lot, but it's remarkable how many first-time visitors don't really know what you mean when you say get up early.
That is,
When it's hard.
that is wonderful advice. Thanks again to Paul and Marsha. Done. Thank you.
Well, as she said, my first book was Blooms, and that was 2003. This is my little ad for myself, so you have to listen to this. And then Awesome Ospreys. My husband is the district ranger at Sealy Lake, Tim Love, Sealy Lake Ranger Station. We've been there 14 years. When we were on the lake, we get to live right at the ranger station, and I could watch the loons right out my window. And so I wrote a children's story first about loons, sent it into Mount Press. They didn't want that. They wanted a book to follow their Owls, Who Are They?, which was by Kyla Jarvis, a third grade teacher here in town who wanted to teach her children about owls. And so I just got to follow her outline. And then I said, I've been watching a lot of ospreys up here, and so they let me write about ospreys. Then the same illustrator of these two, which is the same illustrator as Glacier Park, is Joyce Turley, Mountain Press founder for me. She's from Fort Collins. We went together and did Animals Count in Grand Canyon National Park. It's a counting book to 10. One mountain lion lying in the sun watches below where the elk might run. I said deer at first when they changed it to elk. I didn't realize they had them there. Then there's Henry the Impatient Heron, about a little heron who can't stand still, so what happens to him? This book, Glacier, was supposed to be out in spring, but what happened with that is at Mountain Press, his hires probably about 15 people. And their layout person's 25-year-old son found out he had cancer, and they gave her lots of time off, which is very understandable. And so now we're still kind of waiting for the book to be out. It's real interesting. This is the book, the way it's laid out. They do it in pages of 8, which I always found was real interesting. And then it'll be put together, and this is the proof that came back to us then for the book. And we get to look through it, check the color, and all of those things. My next book out will be, the title isn't going to be Wild Wapiti, and I don't have a cover for it yet, but I went to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and said, yeah, I've got these other children's books. Would you be interested in doing a children's book on elk? So we went together and did that. And that should be out in December. They're only printing 2,000 copies at first, so if you really like elk, grab one of those, because they might not print anymore, I don't know. And then, every time I was writing about Glacier, I heard the glaciers are melting. And so I wrote a little Henny Penny story, Peter Pike and Tammy Ptarmigan, Sally Squirrel, the bad guys, Wily Wolverine, and the bighorn sheep. The mountain monarch is the one who saves the day, the king. Well, he doesn't really save the day because they say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And that's kind of sad. But then we talk about at the end of the book then, so sorry about that if you needed me to be by this microphone. Then we talk about how, what kinds of things children can do to help the environment. So, the totally out there guide to Glacier National Park, we'll go backwards, see if we can get to there. That's, of course, not the cover. And I dedicated this book to my sisters, Diane, Darlene, and Alana, who were all these, who was in Glacier National Park with me in 1966 with my parents. I was 10 years old. And we tried to get to Hidden Lake and couldn't make it because of a snowstorm. This was in late August even. And we came running back down the trail, and that just always stuck with me, running, splashing in my shorts through with just tennis shoes on and a little light jacket running back down. We also stepped in a day use area at McDonald Lake the day before, and then park rangers came around and told us, well, they don't patrol here, we can stay there. Now, this is 1966, of course. You can camp there, now they wouldn't let that happen. But we don't patrol it for bears, so you're on your own. And we're just all camped out. And there's other people around us too. And then my mother got up, our dog always slept with me, and my mom got up in the middle of the night because she was scared of the bears and she'd slept in the car. And she got my dog, our dog, and put it in the car with her. And I was like, what about me? So anyway, that was always the joke. And then in 1967, when the 2 teenage girls had died in the park, then that we remember because that made national news. And we were like, we were right there camping. So that was always interesting. We went back in 1969 too. So my acknowledgments. Now how I handled this is just simply going through, I know this is hard to read on this, going through 4 chapters on nature and then 4 chapters on human history in the park. And my illustrator's Joyce Turley. She does spectacular, bright, dark pictures. It's kind of we're targeting junior high, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. We say ages 10 and up. So welcome to Glacier National Park. And then we have our pages with the maps. Glacier National Park's in Montana. We did a simple map with the red dots being things that we mentioned through the book. And a chapter heading then, we started with glaciers. I actually wrote about mountains first because the mountains came first in the park. But my editor said, no, you're not going to start a book on Glacier National Park with the mountains. So we switched those up. And we'll talk to kids about how the glaciers started and the Ice Age glaciers, the little ice ages in that case. This is Sperry Glacier. The lake that's below it is Avalanche Lake. Of course, this one was taken from an airplane. You'll see a real interesting thing that was new to our publishers. This is a photo by dreamstime.com, and it's on Wikimedia Commons. If any of you are familiar with those kinds of pictures, they're free for use. Anyone can use them. But it's so strange to do that in a book then. You feel like, oh, we should be paying these photographers, but if it's on Wikimedia Commons, you can just use them. And we use a lot of National Park Forest photos, of course, then talking about the Ice Age glaciers, which really carved the mountains of National Park, of Glacier. Even if the glaciers all melt, then it will still be called Glacier National Park based on the large glaciers that carved the mountains, not the glaciers that remain today. And here's our comparison photo of Grinnell Glacier in 1900 and now, what it would look like. And you can still see Salamander Glacier is still there, and it's mostly in the shade. So there's a couple glaciers in the park. There's 25 glaciers in the park today, and there's 2 that aren't changing. They're totally in the shade. Little Gem Glacier up there at the top of the peak, you can see it hasn't changed much, but they no longer consider it a glacier because to be a glacier in Glacier National Park, you have to be 25 acres, you have to be made of ice, and move. And glaciers move 1 to 2 inches a day in summer. They're not very fast-moving glaciers. And then how the glaciers carve the mountain peaks, how a glacier moves the rocks, the kinds of mountains that are formed, the Eredhorn, Cole, and then the Bergstrom, how that can topple the mountain peak off the top by undercutting the slope. And some examples then of the mountain horn and of it's a teach the children about Glacier National Park. And then how a river carves a very winding and very deep V-shaped valley, but a glacier carves the deep, rounded valley, and how it will change those river valleys that were in the park and in the park's mountains into the big rounded valleys. And then where the rocks are deposited. If you add up all the layers in Glacier National Park, they come to 15,000 feet. And then, but there's only, the highest peak in the park is only 10,000 feet. And so where did all that other rock go? Well, it came out here as moraines on each side of the many large lakes here in the park. Now we're going to talk about the mountains.
which I had first, but now we'll change back around, and how they were formed underwater. Ripple marks in the mud cracks on many of the rocks found in the park were all in flat layers underwater. My editor kept going, Donna, we gotta cut that down, we gotta cut that down. And finally, I got it to about 2 sentences for each of the 7 main layers in Glacier National Park. And I think it's the most succinct place you can find those 7 layers in all of, because I was studying books, and I mean, probably 4 or 5 geology books, and I couldn't even find it all in one complete succinct place. So the Grinnell layer is red rocks. And the other thing, you might see this rock layer thing happening or in many different books, but they were never in the colors that the rocks were. So I asked my illustrator to please put them in the colors that you will find on the ground now. I know you can't see that really well. It's not my intent here today to go through all of those. If I had an hour or more, we could go through those and study them and talk about what they were made of. Again, you can find that many places, and then when my book comes out, you can find it succinctly there. So, what was that one's title? Oh, how the Rocky Mountains had formed and how the Lewis overthrust, it just kind of kept rolling. I think going back to this one, but I can't say this because I'm not a geologist. I think it went, they sag in the middle with their weight, they got so tall and heavy. And as the plates were pushed together, pushed the mountains up, and it's like a hammock, and I think it just went whoop. And I also want you to notice that out here is where a little bit later we're going to talk about Chief Mountain, and how Chief Mountain, which is a peak out here, you know, right at the border of the park, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation Park, can be made of the oldest layer, the Alton Formation. So keep that in mind when you get to that picture. So then we have these beautiful sculpted mountain peaks, and the Lewis overthrust, roll, pushed up, pushed up, pushed up, roll, 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 finally slipped like that hammock. That's how I imagine that happening, but I can't say that for sure because, like I said, I'm not a geologist. Slip, and it's riding over top of Younger Rock. And there's the peak. So you have Younger Rock below, and you have the butte standing up there. And the butte is actually, if you can see it from the back, it's actually slanted up like this, and then it's straight. And then, of course, the mountains in the park aren't that tall. The tallest one's only 10,466 feet tall, this one, Mount Cleveland. And what makes them look so tall is from the valley floor to that top of that peak is a rise of over 5,000 feet. So when you're down in that valley, over here behind that one tall tree standing there, and you're looking up, boy, it looks tall. But compared to Denali at 20,000 feet, it's not that tall, or Everest. But the peaks are just spectacularly sculpted. And so we have weather and water. And what makes the parks weather, and it gets 400 inches of snow each year. Now we know that snow compacts, it evaporates, it blows around. And so I know I need to stay by the microphone, I'm not used to doing that. And so it's not always 400 inches, and it's not, that makes 33 feet. It's more like 12 feet in the park for the snow. But in the spring, all the snow makes all these fabulous waterfalls. And Trick Falls in the Two Medicine area. And then they built all the surf lakes with these different beautiful lakes. And the color of many of the lakes in the park are from Glacier till. So if you see a turquoise, creamy colored lake, then you know above it, there's a glacier working. Because it will grind that rocks into that rock flour, and then it's in the water, and it's reflecting sunlight. And the beautiful different waterfalls. And then they all go into the parks, large moraine, you know, dug out from the glaciers, those big puddles that were down there, as these beautiful lakes. And the glaciers carve those spectacular views. Wherever you have glaciation, you've got spectacular views into the mountains. It's not just the mountains themselves happen to be beautiful, it's that at the end, it's cleared out everything between you and the mountain peaks. The glaciers carved all that away. And the Triple Divide Peak, which is an amazing peak in the park. Water from that peak, it's made Glacier be called the headwaters of the continent, because water from this peak flows to the Pacific Ocean, to the Arctic Ocean, and then to the Atlantic Ocean. So I tell kids, if they stood on the top of that and they poured out water, and it went down to 3 different sides, you would be reaching those 3 different things. Now, Canada claims one of those, but I don't think they can claim it, because theirs only goes to the Pacific, the Hudson Bay, and then to the Arctic, but the Hudson Bay goes to the Arctic, so they can't claim that. So anyway, we've got the Great Peak. And it's not that high either, it's kind of interesting. It's not the tallest peak in the park. So then we have the animals, and again, my illustrator did just spectacular animals, talking about the forest in the park. I know we have to hurry. Where are we at? Oh boy, I'm not even to chapter, well, this is chapter 4. And flowers, and the animals, and the wolves. They haven't been in the park. They've been in the park all along, but they didn't den in the park for the last 40 years. And now they are again. And of course, the park's most famous animal. We talk about the birds and the pretty ducks and the different fish. And now the human history of the park. This is where I get bogged down because I just love it so much. The Native Americans. Look at that horse bridle. That's why we put it on this first one too. And they held the bridle, they tied it around their wrist so that they could, if they were hunting or a war party, they could spear, or they could do their bow and arrow, they flip the reins around to the other side if they needed to pull the horse the other direction. But horses didn't always come with saddles and bridles, and once they started having a mare and a stallion, then they could have breeding their own horses. Crowns of the continent, and the first European explorers were there. It's a quick read for adults. It's a longer read, a little slower, how the park's boundaries were formed. So this one got a little bit rough because you had to do, going from, like, maybe you might cover 100 years. So I just separated out the park's eastern boundary, how the park western boundary formed, how the southern boundary and the eastern boundary. And then the early settlers, and then we come to when the park was a park. So lots of things had to be built those first years. The train stations, or the railroad, of course, built them. The building of the going to the Sun Road. I think it's interesting that on the pictures from the western side show horses building the road with the men, and then you get to 2 years later on the eastern side, you've got the steam shovels now, and then how they dedicated the paths. And then, this one was interesting, Leave No Trace. It's changes in policy. The next 40 years brought huge changes in policy in the park with grizzly bears and such. But the professional reviewer of the book said, no, you can't say changes in policy to kids, they don't care. So we just used a couple examples then instead of trying to say it was changes in policy of how fires policy changed and how dealing with the grizzly bears changed. And we put it as 2 campers died in the park, not teenagers. 2 girl teenagers. I mean, that would just be, what? Yeah. So, and then what will change for some of the different animals. If you're whiting in the park, the glaciers melting are going to affect you more. But they are finding from studies that all they need is the high cold country. They don't necessarily need a moving glacier. And then the view ahead. So in clearing going to the Sun Road, this one has some things wrong on it. We changed that to, of course, Glacier National Park is the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, and we changed took out the Rocky Mountain Trench and put in the right symbols in there. So it's really great that the park right now is thinking of themselves as more of a whole, and they're getting out and talking more with, we've lived on the park, on both sides of the park. In the 80s, we lived in Schullery for 6 years, and now we've lived on this side of the park and explored it. So we've gotten to know both. And the park is so much more open to coming out into communities and teaching and sharing and doing lots more things with people. So that's really great. Then the N, responsible respect, and how to deal with all of the different animals and the things that you'll see in the park. This picture's changed because if you noticed, it was before in the park. And I can't quite read it from here. Usually I do, but I don't know if I can read that last.
The caption, what? I can't read it from there, even in that. It does wash it out, doesn't it?
But it's about helping the park so that it will remain intact and together forever. So thank you.
If anybody has a question for Donna, we have just a couple of minutes here. Does somebody have a question you'd like to ask? If not, I would like to very much thank our presenters today, this morning, Paul Schullery, Marsha Karle, and Donna Love for helping us celebrate the 100th birthday of Glacier National Park. And please remember that our authors will be out in the lobby area here at the book sale and signing table, and thanks to you all.